Hey guys, thanks for watching. Click the subscribe button if you want to support this channel. If you missed the last video on things to do in quarantine, should be up there in the cards right now and you can watch that and come back here afterwards. So this video was supposed to be the first part in a series about human rights. But I wanted to explain the difference between human rights and humanitarian law, so I had to start with humanitarian law. Then I found this really interesting story in the history of humanitarian law, so I thought that I'll tell that instead. So you can think of this as the prequel to the prequel. Now, the story I wanted to show you guys today is the story of Henri Dunant and the history of the International Committee of the Red Cross. So let's start in the 19th century. There were no organised and well-established army nursing systems for casualties, and no safe and protected institutions to accommodate and treat wounded soldiers on the battlefield. Henri Dunant was born in Geneva, Switzerland in 1828. In 1856, at 28 years old, he created a business to operate in foreign colonies after being granted a land concession by French-occupied Algeria. The land and water rights, however, weren't clearly defined, and the colonial authorities were not being especially cooperative. Dunant decided to appeal directly to French Emperor Napoleon III, and he was with his army at Lombardy at the time. Napoleon's headquarters were located in the small city of Solferino. Western Europe had maintained peace between the fall of the first Napoleon at the Battle of Waterloo in 1815 to the rise of his nephew, Napoleon III. The Crimean War had brought war back to Europe. On June the 24th, in 1959, a major battle had just taken place. A battle known as the Battle of Solferino, a part of the Second War of Italian Independence. This was the last major battle in world history where all the armies were under the personal command of their monarchs. Napoleon III of France, Victor Emmanuel II of Sardinia against Franz Joseph of Austria. Around 300,000 soldiers fought, resulting in French and Sardinian victory. Henri Dunant arrived in the evening after the battle and came across the battlefield. Between 23 and 40,000 soldiers littered the field, wounded, dying and dead, with little attempt to provide care. Shocked, he took the initiative to organise the civilian population, mostly women and children, to provide assistance to the injured and sick soldiers. They lacked supplies, and Dunant organised their purchase and helped to erect makeshift hospitals. He convinced the population to care for all the wounded regardless of their side in the conflict, inspiring the local women to coin the phrase "tutti fratelli," all are brothers. Dunant also secured the release of Austrian doctors captured by the French forces. Dunant returned to Geneva in early July and wrote about his experiences in a book titled A Memory of Solferino. This book was published in 1962, and in it he developed the idea that in the future a neutral organisation should exist to provide care to all the wounded soldiers. He printed 1,600 copies at his own expense and distributed them to many leading political and military figures in Europe. He began to travel through Europe to promote his ideas, and the Geneva Society for Public Welfare made his book and its recommendations a topic of one of their meetings on February the 9th, 1963. Dunant's recommendations were examined and positively received by the members. They created a 5-person committee to further pursue the possibility of their implementation. These 5 members, known as the Committee of the Five, were Henri Dunant, Gustave Moynier, a lawyer and the president of the Global Society for Public Welfare, Guillaume-Henri Dufour, renowned general of the Swiss Army, and Louis Appia and Théodore Monnoir, who were both doctors. Their first meeting on February the 17th, 1863, is considered the first meeting of the International Committee of the Red Cross. Differences between Gustave Moynier and Henri Dunant developed early over the reach of the organization's authority and its legal and organizational formation. Most of all, the idea to grant immunity to wounded soldiers and medical staff. Moynier considered this unfeasible and advised Dunant not to insist on this concept or risk the collapse of the project. Dunant continued to advocate this position in his travels and managed to persuade powerful political and military figures in Europe of his ideas. Just 1 year after their first meeting, the Swiss government invited the governments of all European countries, as well as the United States of America, Brazil and Mexico, to attend an official diplomatic meeting. 12 states and kingdoms signed the First Geneva Convention that day. They agreed on the immunity from capture and destruction of all establishments for the treatment of wounded and sick soldiers, the impartial reception and treatment of all combatants, the protection of civilians providing aid to the wounded, and the recognition of the Red Cross symbol as a means of identifying persons and equipment covered by the agreement. Dunant won the ideological battle, but lost the war as Moynier became president of the ICRC. Dunant remained in the International Committee until 1867, when he declared bankruptcy, due to business failures in Algeria, at least partly because he had neglected his business interests during his tireless activities for the International Committee. The controversy surrounding Dunant's business dealings, combined with the ongoing conflict with Gustave Moynier, led to Dunant's expulsion from his position as member and secretary. A warrant was issued for his arrest, forcing him to leave his home city of Geneva, never to return. In the following years, national societies were founded in nearly every country in Europe. The project resonated well with patriotic sentiments that were on the rise in the late 19th century, and national organizations were often encouraged as signifiers of national morality. Moynier used his influence to ensure that Dunant would not receive assistance and support from his colleagues. For example, the gold medal prize of Sciences Morales at the Paris World's Fair did not go to Dunant, as was originally planned, instead going to the ICRC thanks to Moynier's involvement. Even Napoleon III offered to pay half of his debts if Dunant's friends would cover the rest, which they were willing to do. These efforts were thwarted by Moynier. Dunant lived in poverty, falling further into debt while continuing the advocacy of his ideas, practically forgotten in the official discourse of the Red Cross movement. Dunant moved to Paris, where he lived in meagre conditions, while continuing to pursue his humanitarian ideas and plans. During the Franco-Prussian War, he founded the Common Relief Society, and soon after the Common Alliance for Order and Civilization. He argued for disarmament negotiations and for the formation of an international court to mediate international conflicts. Later, he worked for the creation of a world library, an idea which had echoes in future projects such as UNESCO. In his continued pursuit and advocacy for his ideas, he further neglected his personal situation and income, falling further into debt. He lived in poverty, moving around Europe. In 1887, while living in London, out of Moynier's influence, he started to receive monthly financial support from some distant relatives. This enabled him to live a somewhat more secure existence. He moved to the Swiss resort village of Heiden later that year. In 1892, he moved into a local nursing home. And in 1895, Georg Baumberger, the chief editor of a St. Gallen newspaper, met Dunant walking close to his nursing home. A month later, he wrote an article titled Henri Dunant, the founder of the Red Cross. The article struck a chord and was soon reprinted in other publications throughout Europe. He received renewed attention and support, and his financial situation improved. In 1897, Rudolf Müller wrote a book about the origins of the Red Cross, updating the official history to highlight Dunant's role. In 1901, Dunant was awarded the first ever Nobel Peace Prize in founding the International Red Cross movement and initiating the Geneva Convention. The official congratulations from the International Committee finally represented the rehabilitation of Dunant's reputation. There is no man who more deserves this honour, for it was you, 40 years ago, who set on foot the international organisation for the relief of wounded on the battlefield. Without you, the Red Cross, the supreme humanitarian achievement of the 19th century, would probably have never been undertaken. He shared this with French pacifist Frédéric Passy, founder of the Peace League, and active with Dunant in the Alliance for Order and Civilization. Hans Day succeeded in placing Dunant's share of the winnings in a Norwegian bank, preventing access by Dunant's creditors. He didn't spend any of his winnings, continuing to live simply and reserving it for charitable causes. In the final years of his life, he suffered with depression and paranoia. There were even days when Dunant insisted that the cook of the nursing home taste his food before his eyes to protect him from being poisoned. He died on the 30th of October, 1910, 2 months after the death of his long-standing adversary and longest-serving president of the ICRC, Gustave Moynier. His final words were, "Where has humanity gone?" So thanks a lot. I hope you guys enjoyed that. I know I ended on a bit of a dark note, but I just thought this story was incredible. So as I said, you can think of this as the prequel. So my next video will be more info on how the international humanitarian law infrastructure works.